Good evening, members, to this evening's Councillor Conduct Committee here at Gunwolf. Are there any apologies for absence? Teri, we've just got one member running late.
Just Councillor Garung has let us know that she's running late, but otherwise everybody's here.
Fantastic. Can I ask members to approve the record of the meeting held on the 11th of December 2024? Is that approved, members? Thank you. I have no urgent matters by reason of special circumstances. Are there any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interest or other significant interest this evening? None? Okay, fantastic. I now move on to item 5, the review of the ethical framework. And over to you, Bapinda. Did I hear agreed already there or something? Okay. Bapinda, over to you.
Sorry, I forgot. So, yeah, I'll rely on my two senior colleagues with me as well to support me as we go through this. Members will recall the history, perhaps those of you who've served on the council for a number of years, that it's been a long and a complicated history regarding the code of conduct. It swung in various directions. So there's a short potted history. Back in 2000, there was a new act that was introduced. Sorry, it makes me sound like an old timer, that does, but the Local Government Act 2000 introduced what was then known as the new Code of Conduct for elected members. It was the first time we had a national Code of Conduct for elected members, which set out very specific duties and obligations, and in addition, it actually set out, I think, for the very first time, sanctions for members if they didn't comply with the code in relation to declarations of interest and conduct and behaviour. But in addition to that, the Act also created, for the very first time ever, a national body called the Standards Board for England, which was responsible for dealing with the more serious allegations. And the Standards Board had powers for disqualification of elected members in cases of very serious breaches. Local committees also had the powers of suspension. That carried on and ticking along for a number of years until 2011, when the relevant Secretary of State at that point, Mr. Eric Pickles, decided that one, he didn't like the Standards Board for England, and there was some justification for that. A lot of matters were unnecessary. Well, there was a lot of delay in dealing with a number of matters, and a number of high-profile cases had been incorrectly decided as the courts had adjudicated on them subsequently. And he also took the view that if there was to be a sanction against elected members, it ought to be undertaken at the ballot box rather than by other elected members or non-elected officials determining those roles. So in 2011, the Standards Board for England was abolished, and all matters were left for local authorities to determine, and all powers of discipline other than issuing a censor were also removed. Standards committees were left with the obligation to adopt a code of conduct and enforce the code of conduct, but the only powers that they had was to censure a member who had then breached it. The government that was elected last year has now decided that we need to revisit the code of conduct again, and they've issued a consultation exercise, and you have that before you. We can go through that in the detail in a minute. There are 40 questions set out in that consultation, and in essence, the key areas that they are suggesting for revision is, one, whether there should be a national code and whether local authorities should be permitted to add to that with a local flavour, if I can call it that, whether we should introduce, again, powers of suspension, powers for disqualification. the introduction of a national body again for determining the more serious matters that may allege to a breach. From memory, sorry, I haven't had a chance to read the papers again, I will in a minute. Those are the main areas I think will probably be for consideration and discussion tonight. So we'll go to the paper in a minute. In addition to that, I asked Teri to write to, I think the email went to group leaders and group whips to identify those areas that we would probably want to spend a little bit more time on discussing tonight, rather than focusing on all 40 questions. The first few questions I can remember from memory are all mainly administrative of a nature, and there's a few of those at the end. So if I can, Teri, ask you to chip in here and just highlight those areas that the various groups have suggested we might want to look at. And also we've written to the independent member who's unable to attend tonight, and he too has responded with some areas that the committee may wish to focus in on. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhupinder. So we have heard from most people now. So leader of the opposition group, Councillor Perfect, emailed to say, really, we just need to focus mainly on the suspensions and sanctions sections. We've literally just received an email from the leader of the council, and he suggests that draft response generally are looking good, but would seek the committee's opinion around questions 38 and 39. In particular, what that makeup would be, and specifically around the use of suspensions again, the use of facilities and council laptops to access both correspondence and meeting papers if they were not suspended from service. And then question 18 and 19 around whether it should be an independent committee or effectively our existing councillor conduct committee. So that's the views from the from the leader of the council. And then in terms of the independent person, in the main, he does agree with majority of the commentary that's already there. He's given me a couple of comments, which it might be easier because of the way he's given it to me if we pause at the relevant questions, and I can chip in at that point, if that's okay.
Through you, Chair, thank you. So I think if we deal with the two meaty questions first and invite comments, hopefully we can reach a consensus as a committee, but if we don't, I'm content to submit a response to say that there was a members may have, sorry, mic switched off.
Members? Councillor Scott.
I've got a couple of comments and a question, if I may, Chair. First of all, I want to thank Bhupinder and his team for getting us ahead of the curve and getting this together. I also feel, I need to celebrate our Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, and Jim McMahon, who have obviously, given us a nudge in the right direction, because I do think our standards need improving and that we always should be seeking a robust and political debate, mutual respect, meaningful engagement. I'm relieved that we're discussing the situation, the points that have already been making, because they are on my list, because there are some things when it doesn't go quite right, where people are suspended or, lose everything, and then they're found to be innocent. So, we need to make sure we get it right, and we're fair and consistent. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. Members? Councillor Kim. Bhupinder, are you looking for answers for particular ones, or are you looking for comments that you're going down?
I think at this stage, just having general comments, and then I think collectively with yourself, Teri, and Vicky, we'll marshal those into a response that we can send back.
Councillor Kim.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My main concern ever since the Councillor Conduct Committee came into being on the demise of the Standards Committee, is that councillors or members, sorry, who are complained against do not seem to have, there seems to be no facility for a right of reply to the committee. And I think that is wrong, because that then smacks of a kangaroo court. I do think that they should, if we're going to be discussing the future, and especially if we're talking about suspensions, the person who's the alleged wrongdoer, shall we say, should have the right to reply to the committee before any judgment is made. When it comes to suspension, I'm not happy, I'm not content with the 6 months suspension being maximum, because that will be ipso facto triggering a by-election, because they will be out of action for 6 months, and which the constitution of the council says that there's got to be a by-election if that happens. So I would suggest something like a 3-month suspension. My other point is that if we're going to have suspensions and removal of allowances and things like that, I do think that the committee should be chaired by an independent person, because we're taking away, in some cases, we're almost taking away somebody's livelihood. And as Joanne says, you know, they may in turn be found to be innocent, as it were. So they're my main points. I understand there's going to be a cost implication for having an independent chairman, but I do think that the benefits of having an independent chairman would outweigh that. So that's my main points, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Kim. Bhupinder, just for newer members who haven't necessarily gone through a full investigation on our panel as yet, the right of reply, would you want to just explain that bit at the moment, where we are at the moment with right of reply for members that are facing conduct?
Yes. Teri, please do correct me if I get this wrong. The process that we have at the moment is that when a complaint comes in, that complaint is forwarded to me. I will review the complaint, and this committee has delegated authority to me to undertake an initial screening process of that, and I will review the complaint against 5 or 6 factors. From memory, those factors include: is the complaint against a councillor of Medway Council? You'll be surprised to hear that I get complaints about others who aren't councillors. Does it actually allege that they have breached the code, and if so, which part of the code? I get complaints that show no breaches of the code. Is there enough material there for me to make a decision? Is the complaint a complaint that might be considered trivial, tit for tat, or mischievous? And I do get some of those from time to time. And I can't remember the other category of. Oh, is it within 6 months of the incident? Anything over 6 months, unless there's a very good reason, we will not go on to investigate. I'm pleased to say that the vast majority of the complaints do not meet those thresholds. It's not that I adopt a particularly high threshold there, but I seek to see, is there anything there that's worthy of complaint, and actually the expenditure of public funds, looking at those. Once I've written a draft decision, I share that with the independent person who reviews not just my answer, but the whole of the complaint process in terms of the letter of complaint or the email and all the material. He will come back to me. So far, I've been very lucky in that they have not disagreed with my draft decision, and I've then been able to send that back to the complainant, but also then share it at that point with the elected member who's been complained about, so that they know that there was a complaint and what the outcome of that was. If I were to decide that the complaint has some merit and ought to perhaps be investigated, I would then produce a report, bring it back to this committee, and it's this committee who then decides whether that matter ought to be investigated or not. If it moves forward to an investigation, I will appoint somebody to undertake an investigation, and during my tenure, Vicky has been very lucky to be nominated on one occasion to undertake an investigation. That will include getting all relevant material that might be necessary from the complainant, if necessary, perhaps interviewing them and getting some further material. Opportunity will also be provided at that stage to the councillor in order to respond to the complaint and also adduce evidence or any witnesses that they think can help to support them in their defence. That is then written up into a report. That report will then come back to this committee, and the councillor who is complained of will also be invited to that committee, and it will be for this committee then to determine whether there has been a breach of the code, what elements of the code were breached, and what sanction, if any, to apply. We would hold that hearing in a number of key stages. So firstly, if there was a report, I, or more likely Vicky, would present that report if she's done the investigation. I would advise the committee, and the councillor complained of would have the opportunity to make representations. If the committee found that there was a breach at that stage, we would then pause and then ask the member complained of to make any further representations they may wish to do so in relation to what sanction the committee may wish to make. And I would advise the committee, and then it's a matter for the committee to determine what to do. In the last 3 years or so, my memory is that we've only had one complaint that I brought to the committee, and the committee considered it needed investigating. The complaint was investigated, the report was produced to the committee, the councillor was invited but declined to attend. Deliberations took place, the committee determined the outcome, and we then published that notice. So that, in a nutshell, is the summary of the process that we have.
So, Councillor Kemp, obviously the right reply is still still going to be there. Is your concern is that you wanted to make a note to say that that should be there, and because the evidence, like any court, we're not a court, we're a conduct committee, but the right reply is always there for anyone that's been investigated against.
We say it's not a court, but it virtually is, isn't it, in all but name. The case which comes to mind is the case regarding the late Councillor Carr, when yes, he may well have been in breach of the code, according to the letter of the law, and an awful letter was sent to him, a disgusting letter. I saw it as a whip. I saw it before it went out, and I said this should not be sent out. It was sent out. He picked the letter up at midday, and 12 hours later, he had died. So we had Councillor Carr. Some of you may not know him, but seemed to be a very robust gentleman. But obviously, he had some mental issues which he was obviously covering up, and they came to the fore. And I may be wrong. I mean, in the light of what Bhupinder said, he may have had a right to appeal before the committee, and he may well have declined. I don't know, but I was under the impression that he didn't have the opportunity to. That may well be is that before your time, Bhupinder? Yeah. So you may. So that's all I can think, and I just want to guard against that happening again. It may well be now that you've got provisions in place to counteract that. But it still gives. I still get the impression that once it comes to the committee, it's already been decided, and I think that's a bit. I'm uneasy with that, Chair, if I may say so. I'm just uneasy with that.
Can I just, there's just something I just need to put out there first of all, and I will come to members. I just think we need to be a bit careful, because I do remember, obviously, Councillor Carr, and I was around at that time. I just want to be really careful, because obviously our legal team and other stuff, they didn't do that to, you know, to send it out to cause him to drop the next day. So I just want to make that very clear, because I don't know any...
They obviously weren't aware of the other issues.
No, that's fine, yeah.
No.
I mean, all the time I've been involved in council conduct, the right reply has been there if they wish to turn up. And I do remember quite a few investigations where, and they've just not turned up to the meeting. Before I just open up to comments quickly...
Can I just say one thing first?
Yeah, as long as I hold my thought.
Just to add, in terms of the process, is exactly how Bapinda stepped out. There's just one thing that, in addition to that, is that the independent person, when an investigation report is carried out, the independent person is given an opportunity to give commentary and their view as well from a place of independence. So, and the committee has to have received the IP's view and to have considered that as part of its decision making when it gets to that stage, that hearing stage. That's something that's in place at the moment. That's just something you might want to think about in terms of feedback.
Yes, I agree with that, because when I was blamed for the closure of Deangate Ridge and everything else, when they had wanted posters up, wanted dead or alive, Councillor Kemp, preferably dead, posted on Who post office, I did see the independent person, and he did agree that there was no case to answer.
I mean, so, I'm going to open up now, Councillor Prenter, but I get the feeling I certainly wouldn't want to agree a process where, like, anyone is involved in unions or anything, where the actual person doesn't have a say. So I'm not getting a sense from around the table that we want to change that, and I'll come to you. I'm not getting that sense. Councillor Prenter.
Actually, mine was about another question. Did you want to...
Okay, Councillor Peake.
Well, I have two. I'm not even quite sure what the process of... Sorry. It's such a small room. I'm not even quite sure about the process here, whether we should jump to later on questions or not. But I'm very, my ears very perked up with Councillor Kemp's comment about, he said about, there was a sense of feeling that the person's guilty already. So what I'm saying is, when I read his report, to me it seemed loaded, and I have personal experience as a trade union rep, why I have a really good example that stayed with me practically all my life. It's when I was a young man. But before I do that, on question 35, is that okay to jump to? Because this is very specific. Do you consider that a complainant should have a right of appeal when a decision is not taken to investigate? This experience I had as a rep, that was a crux of the matter. There was automatically an assumption, because there was a witness, that this person was guilty, and it was not investigated properly. Now, as you know, as a trade union rep, you have the right to talk to management, make sure they follow policies and procedures, but that doesn't necessarily mean they really do it properly. And I got I was allowed in the staff room, by the way, which, anyway, got talking to the member. Everybody presumed they were guilty. So I'll explain what the case was. This person was accused of gross conduct of a sexual nature as a man, and the accuser was a woman, accused him, and she had a colleague who said they witnessed it. When it turned out that that witness then was sacked by her manager for somebody that was systematically lying about other colleagues, was then came established as somebody that you could not believe their word, then the accuser withdrew their accusation and actually asked for forgiveness from the person she accused. So it wasn't even in... So you go from this, like, everybody's assuming this person's guilty, and then completely withdrawn. So if you can't insist there's going to be an investigation, if that person who had accused hadn't been considerate enough to speak up, what would have happened? And that goes to my other question, that I'm concerned about somebody suspended and therefore you take all rights away. You know, you like, almost treat them like they're guilty already. That was my other question that I wanted to throw out there. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I just want to make it clear to members, I've been a member of council conduct for 10 years, okay? And there is no cases that I've come, and myself and Barry Kemp would have had plenty of conversation about things that we haven't challenged and asked for more detail and made sure that the detail was correct before an assumption was made. So we task Bapinda and his predecessors we task them with a role to do that scanning. And believe you me, that does have to be done, because there are some malicious stuff that's thrown out there, and I'm sure Bapinda and Vicky would agree. And that's why the committee, halfway through with Councillor Chambers as the chair, we decided that we give Bapinda a bit more authority to do some of that sifting. But I can honestly say, in the time I've been on Council of Conduct as a member, that I've had the evidence in front of me, because I wouldn't want to make a judgment on someone without evidence. And we can overturn, and have done with officers in the past, and we have made decisions. As Councillor Kemp will know, we've come up with a different decision to what's been given to us. So I just want to reassure members that there is that process in there. I do understand what Councillor Kemp is saying, though. We don't want a new process to forget that part, and I understand what you're saying as well, Councillor Peake. Councillor Printer.
Thank you. Yes, what I'm going to ask about actually is question 35 that Councillor Peake was just talking about. The screening happens, it's done independently by Bapinda before anything gets escalated to us. That's correct, isn't it? So where the complainant, so it could be a member of the public, they don't have a right to appeal that you've decided not to investigate it. What sort of numbers are we talking about? Because it feels like there might be a significant number that you have to sort of filter out before they come to committee or get investigated any further. Is that quite a large job? That was what I was wondering.
Just for you, Bapinda, before you answer that, I do want to focus, Councillor Prender's right, I want to focus on the new policy that's come in as well as our current one. You can touch on the current one just for clarity.
So Teri very helpfully has set out the number of complaints that we've had over the last 3 years. On average, we get about 8 complaints. And then the percentages, she's deliberately put the percentages in there against the different categories. Over that period of time, there's only one that I have recommended to this committee that needs to be investigated and was subsequently heard. It's fair to say, and I'll try and be as impartial as I can in my phrasing of this, that the most of the complaints that I receive are in relation to parish councils, and most of the complaints do not disclose anything that can be considered under the Code of Conduct. There is a general lack of awareness, both in parish members and those who attend those meetings, as to what conduct would fall within the code. And if I can explain, that a lot of those complaints are about somebody looked at me in a peculiar way, or they didn't speak to me in a respectful manner. And by that, I mean, I think they shouted at me, I didn't like the words they used, as opposed to what I would consider to be offensive use of language, or being particularly direct and blunt. I appreciate that my threshold for those may be slightly higher than others, but I do seek views of colleagues before I come to a view on that.
Thank you. That was just, yeah, I just wanted to know if it was like a one-person decision or if it was more of a group decision, because taking away someone's right to come back and say, actually, I do want you to investigate, it is quite extreme if it hasn't been properly looked into by more than one individual.
The only thing I would add to that is, when I first started, we didn't have the screening powers, and we brought those in because the alternative was that officers, I or Vicky or Teri, would have to write lengthy reports, convene a committee meeting for the committee then to decide to take no action. And if you introduce an appeal mechanism into this, that's then going to double the workload. And obviously that will require resources.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Brent and Bapinda. Councillor Pearce, focusing on, if we can, members, if we can focus on the new way forward that's being suggested, that'd be great. Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chairperson. Yeah, I agree with most of it. I do think we need more teeth, and I believe we did have teeth previously, and these powers previously, but they were taken away for whatever reason. This is sort of partially coming back. I'm concerned with question 19, which is that the committee should generally have the power to suspend members of the council. I think under any circumstances, I don't think members should have the power to suspend another member. I think it should instead be a recommendation to an independent body or person. The reason for that is because, you know, regardless, politics does sometimes come into the equation. You could have a third party member, like a person who's a member of a third party on the council. You know, I don't want to insult the committee, but, you know, that does sometimes come into play, politics. So I think I would go for option no, which is a recommendation is sent to an independent body, and then they ultimately make the decision. A bit like planning, like, you know, we can refuse an application. There's a process which the applicant can take it to, and an independent person will make a decision on that. So that's my sense of it at the moment. Thank you.
I'm not seeing much pushback on that comment around, maybe a pushback on the politics side, Councillor Pearce, but the, because you'd hope Council Conduct's got all reps in, but yeah, it's a fair point. Councillor Brake.
Thank you, Chairman. This again is relative to question 35. And I was reading the response, and it occurs to me that in response to should a complainant have the right of appeal, the response is adamant, no. But it then goes on, as has also been explained verbally, most complaints almost are like tit for tat, or seem to be so frivolous that they're dropped. Well, I'm afraid to the complainant, nothing is frivolous, nothing is can be pushed to one side, and I think it is important that the complainant does have that right to have their case heard properly by independent people. And I can't help but feel that before an independent person is involved, it's gone all through by the local legal team here in Medway Council before an independent person is actually consulted as to what's going on. And perhaps, and I would think that this could be a way forward, and that is that the independent person should in fact be involved at a much earlier stage. Bapinda has also mentioned the fact that, well, if there is an appeals process, that's going to take resource. Well, I don't think that is our responsibility to start to determine as a committee what we as a council should be resourcing and what shouldn't be resourced. In other words, if there is a system in place and we believe that the complainant should be heard and they should have the right of appeal, then it is down to us to make sure that that resource is in place. It's no good us saying, no, we're not going to have the resource, and we know, well, why don't we have the resource? Well, that's going to cost money. Sorry, that is not our job. Our job is to make sure that whoever is involved in any complaint has the opportunity of being heard and their case looked at properly without somebody in the background saying, well, we can't do that because it's additional resource, and we all know that's associated with money. And with the greatest respect, I don't think it matters how that may be wrapped up, put in cotton wool, however you want to put it. I'm sorry, but that is not our responsibility. If the right way is a complainant should be heard and there should be an appeal, then it should be done properly, and we shouldn't be looking at reasons as to why it shouldn't happen.
Can I just say, I just want to check with Bapinda a moment. Bapinda, in the past, because obviously it's not been here in the past as well, but I do remember, it was before your time, Bapinda, but I will mention it, we had a councillor here that was brought through a process by the Councillor Conduct Committee, and then when it was all found to be, they were made to stand up at full council to apologise because of that. But then it was withdrawn, and the committee had to apologise for that because it was wrong information. Teri would know who that councillor was. In the past, there has never been that form of, unless you get different information. So, Bhupinder, if you've got information right at the last minute about, actually, I'm retracting this was wrong, this is, this didn't happen, what had happened in the past? Because you've been around a while, a little while.
Thank you for reminding me I'm almost an old time. It reminds me of what my daughter say, what was it like in the old days? So I'm not aware that there was ever a process for a complainant whose complaint was dismissed without investigation to seek an appeal or a review of that. Clearly, if a complaint is lodged and the committee determines to investigate that complaint is investigated as a matter of good faith. It will be tested in terms of the robustness of the evidence, and it'll be a matter for the committee to determine whether there is a finding of guilt or breach and what sanction, if any, to oppose. If at any stage the complaint is withdrawn, there's a number of routes that could then progress. In a large number of cases, if a complaint is withdrawn, the investigation would fall at that stage. However, in some cases, just because the complainant is no longer pursuing that, there may be alternative evidence which leads to a view that the code of conduct has still been breached and can still be determined independently without the complainant being there or their evidence. And a really simple example of that would be if someone lodged a complaint saying Councillor A failed to declare a pecuniary interest in this matter at this meeting, I want you to investigate it. The committee asks us to go away and investigate it. Prior to us actually writing the report, they then withdraw that complaint. We would still have sufficient resources available to us, I would suggest, to see, one, is there a declaration on the Register of Interests? Two, were they at that meeting and did they declare an interest? And three, was there an interest to be declared or not? And the final point on that is that the elected member would also have an opportunity to say whether they, in their view, felt they had an interest and whether they should have disclosed it or not. So it's not always dependent on the complaint being progressed all the way through, but I would suggest that in the vast majority of cases it is.
And sorry, there was, we're not going to mention the council, but Councillor Kemp will, as I just looked at Councillor Kemp and I remembered it's been a long couple of days, but obviously they had a right of appeal in that time to the Ombudsman. And that's what it was the Ombudsman that overturned the decision. I remember that. That's why it had to come back to council and it had to be apologised. So the Ombudsman was involved at that stage, the local government Ombudsman. Is that still stand under the new process?
The Ombudsman, and I'll check with Vicky and Teri, but to my knowledge, the Ombudsman has never had the power to consider an appeal. What the Ombudsman can do is look at the process that you have followed and determine that you haven't followed your processes. And as a result of that, say you need to apologise for not following your own rules.
So that is still there for members. They can still do that, so they can still go to that. Sorry, I've got members before you guys. Councillor Tijan, and then Councillor Elcroft-Scott.
Thank you, Chair. And probably just one for you, Bhupinder. I just pondering here, what triggers these sanctions? What are the trigger points? in particular with regards to suspension?
So at the moment, because there is no power of suspension, there is no guidance in relation to this. But when the power did exist, the Standards Board for England issued guidance for committees to consider various factors to take into account and what their view was as to an appropriate sanction. That guidance was only guidance. It wasn't compulsory to follow the recommendations, but a bit like for those of you who sit at magistrates' courts, there is a recommended sentencing guidelines in magistrates and also in other criminal courts that judges follow to say, yeah, these factors would be considered aggravating, these are mitigating factors. For something in the middle, this is what you would look to apply as a sanction, and then you can either reduce or add to that depending on what the various factors are. So I would suspect, very much in this case, if the government decided to introduce the power for suspension and it was at a local level, or actually it went to a national body and the national body had that power, that actually guidelines would be produced. I suspect they may revisit the old ones. I may still have the old books at home as to what an appropriate sanction is for a different kind of breach and what the starting points are.
Thank you. Councillor Howcroft-Scott.
Obviously, I've sat on the panel for Councillor Conduct for 5.5 years, and I've always felt we've been, whatever political persuasion we are, fair and robust. And obviously with the guidance, it has been useful having the independent person because, you know, they've usually ratified the decision we've eventually come to, which does give you, you know, peace of mind, really. But I also feel that that it is important that we do still have the independent person and we make sure things are as robust as possible. And we also keep the system where, you know, if I was the complainant and, you know, wasn't happy with the outcome, that person can still go to the Ombudsman as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Howcroft-Scott. Councillor Goran.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. Actually, it was quite helpful and goes to show from the discussion that we're having as well, the importance of a timely review and perhaps an updating of the councillor conduct, the processes as well. And as much as we would want every complaint or any breach of conduct to be thoroughly investigated and that the investigation is led without predetermination, it's thorough, fair and proportionate. I was wondering whether there can be some consideration as to what Councillor Brake has just raised with regards to having a clear appeals process that is not necessarily hindered by the funding issue alone. The other thing that I wanted to request for some clarity around is whether there will be timescales. And as much as I understand that there will be different stages of investigations depending on the gravity of any issue, at the same time, it would be helpful for us to have some idea of the time frames that we're working towards, and clearly there is, an understanding that it is important to have the independent person's views. But I think where there are matters that might require more than what in our general life, the information that we might more in-depth support with understanding people's issues or health issues or mental health issues, things like that, would we be supported in having that sort of awareness, and so that we can come to an more informed decision rather than just being guided by the.
I mean, just before I come to you, Bapinder, I think the good points, Councillor Graham. Just to remind members, though, this is a national document that we're feeding back into. We're not reviewing our current policy or current structure we're doing now, because we follow the procedure that they set now. But obviously, we can put those points in. Would you like to comment on? I mean, we do make way for. It's a good point around the stress levels of complainants and that. You make way for accessibility, don't you, in many ways. I do know we've done that with some parish councillors.
So, in terms of an appeal, there isn't a process at the moment. The only thing is, as I mentioned, a potential complaint to the Ombudsman that we haven't followed our own processes or procedures. You know, if the government wish to introduce that, then that's fine. It'll probably go to an external body, or they might actually require us to establish another committee, and we do have those, for example, in relation to officer matters, where we exercise, where officer can request an appeal on various matters. Where there is to be an investigation, I think it's unlikely that the government will set a time limit within which it has to be undertaken. And I say that simply because of a huge range of factors. Whilst, you know, many of the complaints that I've received so far, I've explained are relatively simple and very easy to investigate. On occasions, they can be incredibly complicated, and I know in a previous authority, I've been involved in investigating some matters, and they've been horrendously difficult, and it's been incredibly difficult to get diary space, not necessarily in mine or in other officers, but with relevant witnesses and members that need to be interviewed, and then the statements need to be agreed, and then we need to find a date for it to be heard when everyone can turn up. So as you can see, things very, very quickly end up taking far longer than perhaps any of us would want. I think those of you who know me reasonably well know that I'd prefer things to be done yesterday rather than tomorrow, and encourage all of my officers and officers that I come into contact with as well to work on that basis. But we have to balance being thorough and giving everybody an opportunity to say things, and actually having a period to reflect on what they've said, to make sure that we've captured everything, and balance that with progressing with due diligence.
Thank you. Just on that one, what is there any provision for well-being or mental well-being during the duration of the investigation process?
Yeah, so at the moment, there is a scheme that is available to officers that's provided through HR for independent coaches, for the use of a better term, to assist individuals in terms of managing their stress that may come with it. And I acknowledge that anybody who is being investigated for whatever circumstances will incur stress. It goes with the nature of the matter, but the quickest way of kind of resolving those is to actually get the investigation done and come to a conclusion, and that should assist. But I can't remember the name of the organisation. Care First. So if we were to be investigating a member, we would always highlight to the member that support is available through them. And I think we did that on the one occasion that we did do an investigation as well. And I would normally clear that with HR beforehand, and it's never been an issue.
But it's good comments to go back in the paper to government. We should make sure we do them comments back. Councillor Printer.
Thank you. It is referring back to what Councillor Brake had said, and that's why I was asking about question 35 in particular, and the initial, if your original complaint is rejected, you don't have a right to come back. historically then, so before you started screening the complaints to sort of filter them out from, what would have happened before? Did they come through to the committee and then get rejected? So was it always the case that there was no right to repeal after the initial rejection, whether it was for the committee or through the screening process? And presumably the screening process happened in recent years.
We would have a report. The officers would have to write a full report for us to read, instead of them having a report and doing it themselves, then giving it to us to look at after. So it would go through 2 different hurdles, wouldn't we? Or 3 sometimes.
So the process that we have now is just a streamlined version of what was happening historically. So historically, what would happen is a complaint would come in. As officers, we would write a report to this committee saying, here is a complaint. This is what we think applying the screening process. And this is what we would then say, can you read the report? Do you agree with us or do you disagree? And where you disagree, please tell us. And then we would write the letter explaining that you'd considered it, applied the screening process, if it fell down for various categories, why it fell down, and then the outcome. The only thing that's changed now is that I don't do a report to the committee. I go straight to, I go to the point where I'm writing the decision letter, because I will have formulated in my own head and reflected prior to that each of the categories under the screening process, what I think about it and why. And where there is a detailed complaint, I write not just a one-liner that your complaint has been dismissed. It's normally a 3 or a 4-page letter going through each of the screening process criteria, explaining what the thought process was and therefore why the decision has come, that I've come to a particular decision. So the reader can fully understand that it's a fully reasoned and articulated decision. They may not agree with it, but they can at least understand what the thought process was behind that.
So it's no change from the practice that you've had for how many years?
In essence, no.
A number of it, right.
I think it's important to add that before that's sent out, that is the independent person is also checked for review. So there is kind of a check and balance on that before any final decisions made by the MO.
So on that initial complaint, if that is prevented from being answered, the independent person has checked it over. Right. So that is the independent.
Yeah, the independent person's already given their view on what the MO's kind of deciding. So there's already been that check and balance before that final decision about what happens with the complaint is made.
Thank
you. Thank you, Councillor Brenner. Councillor Peake?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this has been covered, but 3 things. Very much agree with what Councillor Brake said about the importance, in effect, of saying one thing's a principle, how you resource it is a separate issue. We need to think logically about this, stage by stage. And I'm saying the obvious there, but it's amazing how often people don't do that. So I agree with separating it. This is a paper on principle. Also, somebody, I don't know if it was Councillor Tajan or somebody over there says about the need for independence. I really want us to emphasise the need for that. The more I listen to what's been said, what I'm hearing is that here in Medway, everybody across the parties and officers treat these cases with a great sense of fairness. I can only speak, sorry, I'm going to refer to the same case, there's other cases as well. When you're a trade union rep and you're representing somebody, how often the concept of fairness practically doesn't even touch the floor. In that particular case, is when talking to the deputy manager, she pointed out to me what had happened was the politics, the accuser's manager, the manager of the accused, reacted emotionally, treated this person like they were guilty straight away, and even the comment was made about there's no smoke without fire. That has got to be one of the most ignorant, but one of the most popular sayings there is. So the need for something completely, a process that's completely independent. Bear in mind, this is not a document reviewing Medway's treatment of cases. This is a framework. This is about principles that's going as part of a consultation. So, you know, I want that principle about independence. Almost can't be flippant about it, but almost irrelevant of the cost is, to me, really, really paramount. Yeah. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Peake. Can I just make it, I just want to just make something clear again about the process though, because you know, you're right when we refer to, you know, if you're an employee, when we come from an employee status, we want protection, okay? And the protection goes for members as well, you know, but you can get malicious accusations against members. It does happen as you do in the workplace. I just think you've got to look at the record of the officers and the committee up to now, and the independent person has always. So really, when you look at the and jump in if but when you look at the committee now, the independence is there because the independent person and the officers look at the cases before it comes to us. So you know, the politics side of it, bringing it to us, saying no, let's go and do that anyway. Let's get them in. It's not at that stage on our table at this moment in time. So the process that's working now works. Needs tweaking, could do with some good comments, could do with some good extras. The only word of caution I'm going to give you, if you're going to open up an appeal process, be ready for those people that will use those mechanisms correctly or incorrectly. That's what I need to tell you, because once the team turn down someone's complaint, they know there's a second way of still putting you through, even if it's incorrect from the first time. I'm not saying it is, and Bipinda might tell me off now, but I do think you could be creating something, an animal that you maybe don't want. Not because we don't want us to be looked at, because people will use the system.
Just wanted to make one point there, Chairman, which is that whilst quite rightly when we are looking at these questions in this framework, we are focused in on Medway. This is a national consultation, and therefore we must take into account that perhaps not all local authorities and not all standards committees are as well behaved and as reasonable as they are here at Medway. And without trying to elevate myself on this, that perhaps not all monitoring officers are as resilient and as robust as myself, and certainly I've experienced a number of them within Kent that perhaps are not so, and are easily persuaded or pressurised to not do the right thing.
Thank you, Bipinda. Councillor Wright, did you want to come back?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. If I can just take these to the extremes of where we are today, and say that I think over the years we've seen changes, and I'm all for change if the change is for good, and I'm not one of these people who says, well, it seems to be okay, so just let's leave it alone, because I think there's always many things that need to be looked at in the round and of where we are today. And what's been going through my mind as people have been talking, and that is that if we go back 30 odd years now, when if there was in criminal proceedings, everything would be dealt with initially by the police. So the police would be the investigators, and they would also be the prosecutors. So it was all rounded up, and a case would then come to court. We then had the introduction of the Crown Prosecution Service, which was designed such that police prepared all of the evidence. They are the ones who put forward a case. That was then passed to the Crown Prosecution, who then decided whether it would go forward for prosecution. I'm saying that in the simplest of terms. And I personally always felt, because sitting as a magistrate, I saw both sides of the coin. I worked with one system and then saw the new system coming in, and that was it was quite interesting to see how everybody adapted to the changes. But further on down the road, another change that was brought in, and that was relative to violence and to domestic abuse and assault, where once upon a time it was quite often a case would come into court, because the Crown prosecution believed that there was sufficient evidence to mount a case. Only to find on the day of the proceedings that the victim would in fact would withdraw the case, withdraw the complaint, and the magistrates had no alternative other than to dismiss the case, and that was the end of it. But then a big change came in that actually said the moment somebody complained and it was taken to the police and then the Crown prosecution, once that happened, the matter was out of the hands of the victim, in inverted commas, which again was a good thing to happen because it meant, and we've touched on this earlier in the conversation, and that is that somebody withdraws the allegation. And if you withdraw the allegation, everybody's left high and dry. But what happened in the case of domestic abuse is that it stayed, and there were special police officers who were in fact trained to pick those matters up, and it came out of the hands of the victim in as much as that case had been put forward. We will now pursue this, and thank you very much for the allegation that's been made, the evidence you've provided. We will now take it from here. And the court saw an awful lot of cases coming through the court system. Now, I know these are extremes, but I think the principle is there for us to possibly consider, bearing in mind that this is a national document and not just about Medway Council and what we do here. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brake. Councillor Kemp, just on the paper.
Like Councillor Peake, I was a trade union representative for many years, and one of the things which was brought home to me is that if somebody is accused, whether they're innocent or guilty, they're automatically put up under a lot of pressure. I can cite one case where a girl made a complaint that a teacher had pinched her bum as they walked along the corridor. That teacher was automatically suspended, and it was investigated by the senior management team, and he was up before the disciplinary committee, and I represented him, and it turned out that it was a case of mistaken identity. The teacher in question was involved in a double period at that particular time, so he wasn't in the corridor at all. But it took all the way through, and it took a couple of months to get to the disciplinary committee for it all to be strung out. During that time, that teacher, it nearly cost him his marriage, and he went through an enormous amount of stress. So we need to be very careful and and even-handed and fair before we start casting aspersions and starting the process, which is why the screening process Bhupinder has outlined, which is excellent and should be maintained. So it's to me, we've got to be fair to everybody, even if they turn out to be guilty, it still needs to be treated fairly.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. Teri, do you want to come in?
A person is innocent until proven guilty. That's exactly what it boils down to.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. Teri, do you want to come in?
Thank you. I just wanted to highlight a couple of the comments from the independent person because I realise I've not really done that now. So just in terms of the current sifting process that we have in place, the independent person is very supportive of that. He believes that it's a very good exercise that works very well, and he encourages that filtering system. The other two key bits that he wanted to raise was in relation to question 8. He doesn't believe that co-optees should get voting rights. He says generally that they are present and co-opted by virtue of their particular attributes or knowledge, and therefore are unlikely to even want to use a vote. And then in terms of the question 9, he does believe that an independent person should chair the meeting, but should not have voting rights or casting vote rights. He goes on to talk about how decisions should be non-political, which we've already talked about this evening. So they were just the key things. There's some other minor bits that we can make sure Bhupinder picks up in part of his response, but they were the key things that I just wanted to let members know about.
Terry, I do think the independent chair is a good thing because that keeps that independence there. Councillor Pearce?
Thank you, Chairperson. Just on the interim suspension or suspension pending investigation, it says on there about serious misconduct, but I think we need to actually define what that is, although it might sound obvious. You know, things like physical violence, you know, definitely. That should be a suspension, and you know, if there was clear witnesses at the time, you know, there's no doubt that an incident took place, etc. But I think that needs to be defined quite clearly what that is and what would warrant a suspension pending investigation. Also, going back to my previous point about the committee and what powers the committee has in terms of, do they make the decision itself, or do they put a recommendation to the independent person on suspensions pending investigation, because obviously timeframes, we might not be able to get into a room straight away to make such a decision. I think that needs to be made clear as well, because you know that might need to be decided literally on the day straight after an incident, and obviously we can't all get into a room to put a recommendation forward there. So I think that all needs to be clearly outlined. But most importantly, what would constitute suspension pending investigation? Thank you.
Yeah, but Bhupinder, this is a framework that they're looking at nationally. You have, I presume, you have your red lines now, don't you, that you'd look at if there was a really serious complaint that's witnessed. Would you have for a suspension? Well, you don't have suspension, but for something that you would take immediate action on, maybe that you'd have to talk to under our current structure, not under this suspension structure. There's no.
On the basis that I don't have any powers, nor do the committee, I have not drawn up any guidance in terms of these are so serious that we should warrant taking immediate action. However, please be assured that should something so serious happen, I would have absolutely no hesitation in raising the matter with the Chief Executive, and I'm sure that we both would then organise a fairly urgent meeting with the relevant group leader and group whip, and that collectively we would come to an agreement as to what we thought was appropriate action that needed to be taken. Now, all of that would be obviously consensual and voluntary, but certainly in Medway, I have no hesitation in believing that any action that was agreed would be followed and complied with. However, as I say, this is a national framework that they're willing to draw up, and I can think of places where I've previously worked that would not work unless there was something statutory that provided formal powers for either a committee or someone else to take a decision. Now, in terms of the urgency and doing things quickly, regrettably, in many ways, on this particular narrow point, we are a local authority. We are bound by rules that govern how members can take decisions, and one of the fundamental rules around that is that papers have to be published publicly before you can have a meeting. There is an element of discretion in terms of delegation to officers, and we use those as and when, and hopefully members will agree that those are exercised very reasonably. And in terms of, for example, things like urgent decisions, I always advocate that we use those powers very sparingly, and you know, we convene a meeting as and when we can. But I don't think, for example, for 1 minute, that irrespective of how many responses are sent in, that a power like that would ever be delegated to a committee or individuals under a national framework. It would always be something that has to be considered formally, and if it's a pre-finding of breach, that, you know, there will be and there should be caveats around that and safeguards around that as to how long it can continue for and when you can, as a committee, consider that power of suspension. You know, because what you're effectively doing is taking away the right of representation and limiting that democratic franchise.
Thank you, Bhupinder. I mean, we have had those in the past. I think it's been dealt with by whips and chief execs, serious cases where people have just been asked to step back, and it's worked as of now. Councillor Peake, do you want to come in finally?
Yeah, so I'll try and be quick because obviously time's going on. I was curious to hear get the vibe from other members, and when Councillor Kemp, I think somebody said about, you know, this idea that you're innocent until proven guilty. So that's inspired me to go back to question on page 22, question 23, 24, 25. When I read this, the impression I got, so forgive me if I'm wrong and the whole way I'm approaching it is wrong, but I read this and our responses as if we are working on the basis that somebody is guilty if they've been suspended, because you talk about withholding allowances. What about those that actually rely now on the allowance because they've given up work to be able to do a political job? 24, no longer allowed to have access to premises, withdraw the use of council facilities, and whole and other standalone sanctions. And we're saying yes to this. So that to me is saying, if you're suspended, and because you're suspended, you haven't been found guilty yet, you haven't even been investigated, we're going to take all that support away from you. Sorry, I'm not comfortable with that.
Councillor Peake, can I just just put some clarity on it? The suspension will only come into force if you're found guilty of the incident. So if you're found guilty of and it's like a sanction. So the sanction, and what Councillor Kemp said at the very beginning, up to the 6 months, I suppose, because otherwise it sparks that election point. But that's a sanction that can be given. If they're found guilty, we can suspend them up to 6 months. No, but good points. But at least we've got the clarity. Councillor Scott.
Yeah, Chair, I think we've sort of discussed this and everybody's been part of a really meaningful debate. And I think that, you know, I hate to say this about Medway because it means a lot, you know, Medway matters. But this is a consultation of which we're a tiny part. And I just think we might be going off on different tangents. So I think unless there are other pertinent points, we might want to bring this meeting to a close. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. And I wasn't that. Councillor Peake was the last person that I just let in, so you was on it. We're on the Great Minds Think Alike. We're on there, okay. Sorry, Councillor Peake. Just to finish. I mean, we look at. We talk about how we're going to collate now and delegate. If you're going to delegate us to look at the information and draw something together. We can do that. Councillor Tijan, did you want to just come in very quickly? Do you want to just come in?
Sorry, it's just a comment as this is, as you said, consultation. I mean, a framework is a guidance. It's down to interpretation of such guidance. So, Bhupinder mentioned inconsistencies earlier. So how do we feed into this for that aspect to be considered, you know, and not just a statutory guidance that is down to individual authority interpretation?
Yeah. So this is a consultation exercise. But Bhupinder, do you want to say the next steps? Because I'm saying that we would take the comments via Teri together. We would show you what we've drafted together, and then we would put that forward. Bhupinder, do you want to? Is that how you're seeing it?
Very much so. In the report, we've requested the authority be delegated so that we can pull together a response in consultation with you. I'm more than happy if it's helpful that once we've got a draft version that we share that with relevant group whips so they can feed into it to make sure that we've captured everything before we send it off. We are under a little bit of time pressure to get the response back. I can't remember the closing date. Oh, it's in February sometime. So we've got a bit of time to do that, and I'm more than happy to do that and make sure that we are being open and transparent about the response that goes in.
Do you want us to share this with all our members? Response to each person?
No. So what,
Comments made.
I will sit down with Terry and Vicky and we'll pull together a draft response. We'll share that with Councillor MacDonald. Provided Councillor MacDonald is happy with that, we'll then share that with the group whips to make sure that you are happy with what we think you've all said tonight. And subject to a little bit of perhaps to-in and fro-in, we'll get there. We'll then get that off directly to the government. No need, we won't go back to ask you to send it to all members. We take it, and the view is that you are here representing not only your own personal views, but those views of your group tonight.
And don't forget, members, there is a procedure where people can send their own stuff into this consultation. So, as a whip, if you wanted to put out that paper to your members and ask them to send in their own comments, and they should do as well to the framework, we can do that. My final point to say is just saying that I feel we do a good job already. And I just wanted to thank Bhupinder and the team. We don't have many cases. Sorry, members. We don't have. I'll pull you both up. No. We don't have. The way it's been handled over the years just shows that we have a really robust, a very robust way that Bhupinder handles this, and with Vicky and the team as well. So I think we are extremely lucky, but we do want those bits in place to make sure we do it right. So thank you. I just want to put that on the record with you, Vice Chair.
Okay, well, thank you for the discussion. I move that we take this forward, as just said by the Chair, and that it's sent out, and then we respond by the 28th of February as requested. Thank you.
Is that seconded? Seconded? Yeah. Is that agreed, members? Agreed. Thank you very much. And that concludes the business of tonight's meeting. Thank you very much, members. Thank you.